Last year's Maui Invitational was one for the ages, but this year's matchup should provide plenty of Feast Week excitement as well.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton. You're joining at the place to get your college basketball content 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. Want to thank all of our everyday listeners. Give a special shout out to you and those of you who have joined us on our Discord channel. It is free to join. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. So come hang out with us talking college hoops 24/7 over there. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now to get started. All right, folks, jam-packed episode today. We got a report that 40% of players from the Division I level who entered the transfer portal remain uncommitted. That report is blatantly misleading. We're going to talk about that to close out the show. We're also discussing some scheduling updates, some Feast Week updates coming up, but we're going to start with one of the most well-known tournaments, MTEs, that takes place every single year, the Maui Invitational, because John Rothstein reported on Monday afternoon that the bracket for the 2024 Maui Invitational is set. We don't have game times necessarily, but we've known the teams for a while, but we know the first round matchups and how that is going to shake out. As I'm recording this right now, the official announcement has not come out. I trust Rothstein. He's typically got his sources on this a day or two ahead of time. So by the time you're listening to this, it's very possible that the official announcement has already come out. But if it hasn't, I wouldn't be surprised if it's coming out very, very soon. And it's going to be hard to top last year's field. Last year's Maui Invitational field was absolutely unbelievably stacked. Gonzaga and UCLA played in a 5th place game, and that didn't even feel weird. It didn't even seem unusual that two teams that had battled it out in the Sweet 16 the previous year were facing each other in a 5th place game. But we had Purdue, we had Marquette, we had Tennessee, we had Syracuse, we had a litany of extraordinarily talented teams in that Maui Invitational field last year. And while this year's field is not going to live up to that expectation, or at least on paper at this point, doesn't live up to where those teams were at that time, it's still a pretty darn good field. Still 8 pretty darn good basketball teams, and there's going to be a lot of fun here. And I think the matchups only serve to elevate this tournament. I think it was already a good tournament, already a good group of 8 teams, but looking at these 4 specific matchups, there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of things that I think are going to be really interesting to watch play out over Feast Week in Hawaii for the Maui Invitational. Here are your 4 matchups. We're going to go through them each one by one, but I just want to read all 4 of them to you all. First, UConn versus Memphis, Michigan State versus Colorado, Auburn versus Iowa State, and North Carolina versus Dayton. So you have 2 non-Power 5 teams, but your non-Power 5 teams are Memphis and Dayton. Really feels hard to complain about having mid-major teams in an event like this when they're Memphis and Dayton, 2 of the consistently best non-power basketball programs in the country, not named Gonzaga. Those 2 teams are right up at the very top there. The rest of your field is great. You have a few programs that maybe aren't at the level we're used to seeing them be at, and some teams that maybe I think aren't going to be as good this year as they were last year. But by and large, this is a really good crop of teams and crop of games. Let's start with UConn Memphis. Huge early test for Danny Hurley's team. This team's looking at a 3-peat. Their eyes are on the prize. That is what Danny Hurley and them, that's what they want. That's why Alex Caravan is back. They bring in some fun transfers. Aiden Mahaney comes over from St. Mary's. They add Terrace Reed from Michigan. The main parts for them are not who they added as much as it is who they are retaining and who's going to step up into bigger roles. Caravan's the only starter back, but we're expecting big things from Hassan Diarra, 6th man of the year last year in the Big East. Expecting big things from Samson Johnson stepping into a bigger role in the front court. Expecting bigger things from Solomon Ball. What do you get from incoming freshman Liam McNeely, one of the top 10 ranked freshmen in his class? And then finally, how does Mahaney adjust going from a slow-paced offense at St. Mary's to a much different setting at UConn and a much different setting in the Big East as well? There's a lot of fun excitement about UConn, and they get a good test against a good Memphis team. Memphis has one of the best transfer portal classes among non-power conference teams in all of college basketball. They had Tyrese Hunter from Texas. That's a huge addition. He could go absolutely nuclear in Penny Hardaway's system for the Tigers. You add Dane Danger from Illinois. You add Tyreek Smith from SMU. Musa Cisse returns to Memphis after a pit stop at Ole Miss. There's a lot of good teams or a lot of good talent on this team. And the question now is, can Penny potentially pull off an upset, advance in the Maui Invitational, and kind of use that to spearhead a successful season in the AAC? Because FAU's not going to be at the level they have been the last couple of years. Last year, South Florida shocked the world and won themselves the regular season in the AAC. Will somebody like that step up again? Will it be Abdul Rahim's team in South Florida? Will FAU make a huge leap despite losing so much talent? Or is it going to be Memphis? Is it finally Penny's time to just shine and go dominate that conference? You pick up an early season W against UConn, that's going to make you feel a lot more confident heading into conference play. Next up, you got Michigan State versus Colorado. Michigan State is in the midst currently of their overseas trip. They have 2 wins right now, beat the Madrid All-Stars, beat another All-Star team over there. We've seen some really nice stuff from a pair of sophomores. Cohen Carr led the team in scoring in their most recent game. They also had a 19-point game from Xavier Booker. He looked fantastic in that contest. We've seen some good stuff from Fears as well. This is a team that is fairly young for Tom Izzo's standards. He's not adding via the transfer portal. He begrudgingly added 1 transfer this year in Frankie Fiddler from Omaha, but he's got this young core of guys who didn't play a ton last year behind a lot of veterans, but are now kind of expected to take on bigger roles. And so far, so good. Obviously, these overseas tours are sometimes hard to pin down exactly what it all means when you see their scrimmages and their results, but I think this team's going to be better than last year's team. Certainly will not have the same level of expectation as last year's team did. And they get a Colorado team that is going to look a lot different than last year's team. Colorado, Tristan Da Silva, first-round pick. KJ Simpson, second-round pick. Cody Williams, first-round pick. In fact, Williams was the lottery pick. Da Silva was, I think, 18th overall. Simpson was in the middle of the second round. And yet that Colorado team last year, despite having 3 NBA players on it, they weren't very good. And now they don't have 3 NBA players on this roster. Eddie Lampkin's gone as well. They only added 1 Division I player from the transfer portal, and that was Jakimovsky from Washington State. They added an NAIA guy, a D2 guy. But it's hard to feel confident about a team that underperformed last year with NBA talent and now doesn't really have that same level of talent. There's some guys who might step up, but this is Michigan State's game to lose. If they don't lose this one, or if they lose this one, it's either because Colorado's a lot better than I'm projecting them to be, or Michigan State maybe isn't quite ready to take that leap. So this one's not as exciting of a game as UConn Memphis, but I think it tells us a lot about what we're about to see in the Big Ten and the Big 12. Speaking of Big 12, Iowa State gets a fun early test against Auburn, the Tigers. SEC versus Big 12. What a battle this is going to be. It's Johni Broome versus Iowa State's elite, suffocating defense. The Cyclones are an incredibly experienced team. Their continuity is exceptional. They keep Milan Momcilovic. They keep Curtis Jones. Tamin Lipsey's back. Gilbert's back. They add Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's. I've said it repeatedly, and I'll say it again. I think he's one of the more unheralded and underappreciated transfer portal additions of this cycle. I think he's going to be a monster for TJ Otzelberger and the Cyclones. They had a couple other guys, Deshaun Jackson, Brandon Chatfield from Seattle U come in. Meanwhile, for Auburn, they keep Johni Broome. He's an All-American candidate, very likely going to be in that conversation this year. They also add JP Pegues, a transfer guard from Furman. They add Miles Kelly from Georgia Tech. Very excited to see what Bruce Pearl's team looks like this year. And this game could really go either way. And I think it's going to be one of the most exciting games throughout all of Feast Week, and certainly here in the Maui Invitational. Final matchup, North Carolina, the Tar Heels taking on the Flyers of Dayton. The Heels draw the quote-unquote weak team out of this event. I think if you were a high major team hoping to get as many good games in your non-conference as possible, Dayton is the team you wouldn't want to play. Having said that, if you told me Dayton finishes 6th out of 8 in terms of Torvik ranking or KenPom or net out of this field, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if Dayton finishes higher than Colorado. I wouldn't be shocked if Dayton finishes higher than Memphis. Maybe they can even, tackle some of these other teams here. Maybe Michigan State slips a little bit. Dayton's going to be good. Yes, they lose Deron Holmes, and that is really a tough loss for the Flyers, but they add Posh Alexander from Butler. That's one of the best transfer portal additions that, again, hasn't gotten a ton of attention. They add Zed Key from Ohio State. I'm intrigued by what that could look like. Having said all that, I don't think Dayton's it would be quite an upset if they were to take down the Tar Heels. This North Carolina team brings back Elliot Cadeau. They, of course, bring back R.J. Davis. They add Cade Tyson, an excellent shooter, especially at his size. They have a pair of young, exciting freshmen coming in, and Drake Powell and Ian Jackson. Front court, we talked about this on a recent show. I think they're going to play a little smaller. They're going to play a little faster without Armando Bacot. They got Jalen Washington probably stepping into that starting role. A couple transfer additions as well, and Van Allen Lubin and Tejan Claude. We'll see how it all shakes out for Hubert Davis's team, but I think they advance here and get a chance against either Auburn, Iowa State. Maybe they'll get a chance against UConn in the championship as well. It's going to be a really fun Maui Invitational. I'm really excited to see how these games shake out when we get to that Feast Week event. Well, folks, Feast Week doesn't have to only be MTEs. Typically, that's what we talk about when we talk about Thanksgiving and the games going on, but John Calipari and Brad Underwood proved, hey, we can just schedule a game. We can schedule a game and we can put it on the calendar, and that's what we're going to talk about here coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you folks about today's sponsor, Ibotta. The summer is almost over and lots of folks are taking those dream end of summer vacations, but they're dreading the cost. And with Ibotta, you can get cash back on every single one of your purchases. So you can spend more time making memories this summer and less time dreaming about them. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every single time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of different items, from groceries to beauty supplies, even to kids' toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight that you've been eyeing, or a fancy dinner that you and your partner have been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every single time they shop. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying out the app by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. So just go to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and start earning cash back using code LOCKEDONCollege. That's Ibotta, I-B-O-T-T-A, in the Google Play or Apple App Store using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. And folks, if you want to learn more about some of these matchups, some of the excitement going on in Maui, or this upcoming game that we're about to talk about, check out your local Locked On College podcast. Mark Zanetto's got everything covered for Locked On UConn. Matt Sheehan does a great job for Locked On Spartans. There's tons of other phenomenal resources out there. Zach Blackerby for Auburn does a great job as well. All of that, definitely check out your favorite college show if you have not done so yet. So we're still on the topic of we're still on the topic of Thanksgiving Feast Week games. We're moving away from MTEs, though, because, and this report came out, I believe it was on Friday of last week, so we're going to do it a little bit later, but it kind of lines up with the other stuff we're talking about here. John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks are taking on Brad Underwood and the Illinois Fighting Illini on Thanksgiving. It is not that unusual to see college basketball played on Thanksgiving, but typically the games you see on Thanksgiving are either the semifinals or the actual championship in various MTEs, like the Maui Championship or the Atlantis Championship, or now the Players Era Festival, the NIL-based tournament that's going on in Las Vegas for the first time this year. A lot of times those championships are right on Thanksgiving, the Friday after Thanksgiving, somewhere in that range. But what we have here is Arkansas and Illinois just agreeing to a regular game. A neutral site matchup at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City. It'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. The game is going to be broadcast on CBS and Paramount Plus, and that's significant because it will be broadcast directly after the end of the Detroit Lions-Chicago Bears football game. Most of you, I think, are enough of a sports fans to know that one of the biggest traditions in all of sports history is the Detroit Lions playing a game on Thanksgiving. Happens every year. Dallas Cowboys play a game on Thanksgiving every year. The Detroit Lions play a game on Thanksgiving every year. The Detroit Lions are also kind of good now. Not kind of good, they're really good. And so there's going to be a lot of excitement about a Lions-Bears game on Thanksgiving. And right after that game ends, you go directly into a powerhouse battle between an SEC team coached by one of the most famous coaches in college basketball, and John Calipari, going up against an Illinois team that had one of the best offenses in all of college basketball last year, earned a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. What an incredible back-to-back lineup of events, especially for that combination. And hopefully some of you out there are listening and are this applies to you. You're a Bears fan and an Illini fan. Makes sense, right? Makes sense that there's going to be a big subset of population that is rooting for the Bears and rooting for the Illini. So this could be a all-time day watching sports all day long. Now, it could also be a bad day. I think it's fairly, the Lions are going to be favored. Let's put it that way. The Lions are going to be favored against the Bears. We'll see what happens between now and then. Obviously, things could change. And Arkansas, Illinois, very hard to know right now. I think both teams are expected to be top 25 teams. This Arkansas roster is brand new. So how is that going to shake out? A lot of questions about this team, but I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know who's going to win that game, but it is going to be a really, really fun game of basketball. Here's something we know about John Calipari. His teams typically are not great on the defensive end of the floor, at least not recently. His Kentucky team last year was abhorrent defensively. It was a huge problem for the team. We'll see if a new system, it's not going to be a new system, but a new program, if new players. He's got a lot of the same players from that team last year on this roster. So unless Jonas Aidoo is the best defensive player on the planet, I'm not sure that I'm expecting Arkansas's defense to be particularly good this year. And even if they're okay, even if they're improved from what Kentucky was last year, they're going up against a really good offense. This Illinois team lost a lot of talent from last year. Nobody's denying that. Terrence Shannon's off to the NBA. Coleman Hawkins hit the transfer portal. He goes to Kansas State. But they're still very good. There's still a lot of exciting additions for this team. Their incoming freshman class is incredibly exciting. Will Riley's coming in. Morris Johnson's coming in. Kasparas Jakusionis is coming in as well, Lithuanian prospect. A lot of people have him as a one-and-done lottery-type talent. If you've been following some early 2025 NBA draft talk, he is already kind of getting lit up as a potential breakout star this upcoming season in college hoops. They also had Kylan Boswell from the transfer portal. Trey White comes over from Louisville. Kerry Booth from Notre Dame as well. This is going to be a good, high-scoring team going up against the Calipari team that looks pretty similar to last year's Kentucky roster. Don't be surprised if both these teams score 85-plus points. Don't be surprised if somebody hits a hundo in this contest. The last thing I'll say on this game before we talk a little bit about Pitt's non-conference schedule, which was revealed on Monday afternoon. This is a fun game for the Ivisic family as well. Big Z's, Zvonimir Ivisic, of course, followed John Calipari from Kentucky to Arkansas, so he will be playing for the Razorbacks, and he will be going up against his younger brother, Timislav Ivisic, who is one of those incoming freshmen for Illinois. Not exactly sure what the younger Ivisic's role is going to look like for the Illini. Hopefully those two guys will get an opportunity to actually duke it out on the court, but at least they'll get an opportunity to spend some time together for Thanksgiving, which, if nothing else, is kind of a fun little story for them. Want to talk Pitt's non-conference schedule? There's a lot of non-con schedules that came out on Monday. It felt like that was the day that a lot of teams decided, hey, we're done. Let's release it. Let's let people know that we're finalized with this portion of our schedule. I want to talk Pitt's in particular because for the third year in a row, and I borrowed this from Rocco Miller, who does a phenomenal job reporting college basketball schedules on Twitter. If you haven't followed him, definitely check it out. It's a great way to get updated on non-conference games as they get scheduled. He noted that 3 years in a row, an ACC team has significantly boosted their non-conference strength of schedule after getting snubbed the previous year from the NCAA tournament. Wake Forest had a non-con schedule ranked around 340 in 2022. They missed the tournament. The next year, they added LSU, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Rutgers to their non-conference schedule. Last year in 2023, Clemson's non-con was 340-ish. Again, similarly, the next year, they add Memphis, Bama, TCU, and Boise State. Last year, Pitt was about 203rd. Now they're about 150th, so it's not as dramatic of a jump in terms of strength of non-conference schedule. But they, again, just like those other two, they missed the tournament last year. Their strength of schedule was considered a negative for them. Now they're boosting it up. The schedule doesn't scream like elite by any stretch, but it's not bad. Their home games are kind of what we're seeing from a lot of these power conference home schedules. Radford, Murray State, Gardner-Webb. They do have West Virginia, VMI, Eastern Kentucky, and Sam Houston State. Again, mostly by game. Sam Houston State's a decently good program. Murray State obviously has had success. West Virginia is a power conference team. Their away games, they play at Ohio State and at Mississippi State. That's a quality pair of true road games. Neutral, they'll play LSU and then either Central Florida or Wisconsin. So it's a better schedule. Will it lead them to the NCAA tournament? Hard to say. They lose Bob Carrington to the NBA. Blake Hinson's out of eligibility. They had some guys leave via the transfer portal. They do add Damian Dunn from Houston and Cameron Corrin from Florida State. Is it enough to get Jeff Capel's team back into the big dance? Remains to be seen. Folks, we're going to close out the show talking about a report that has been going around on social media that 40% of the players who entered the transfer portal this season remain uncommitted. And I'm going to tell you why that is blatantly misleading. Coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And usually we're filling you in on a boost or a bonus offer from FanDuel. Well, we have something a little bit different for you this time. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Folks, looking ahead, 2025 national championship odds. UConn is in front. Duke, is in front, plus 1,000. We also have UConn right behind them. And you have Gonzaga and Baylor and North Carolina all at plus 2,000. If you want to get in on that action, you want to get in on any of the other action, they got player of the year odds. They got conference winning odds, all sorts of fun stuff. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you can download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking about something that I didn't expect to be talking about, which is those engagement bait Twitter accounts that we see pretty frequently, people posting stuff where they're just trying to get a rise out of people. And one of them that we've seen a lot in the last 2 years is a figure that shows the number of players who entered the transfer portal and then the number of players who have committed in the transfer portal. And they're usually using like verbal commits or one of the sources, D1 tracker that tracks transfer portal activity. And they'll use that data and they'll say, look, according to these 2 data points, 40%, and that's what it was this most recent time it went around over the weekend on social media, 40.4% of players who entered the transfer portal have not committed to a new school. And this data is, I was going to say misleading or like it's wrong. It's wrong. It is not correct data. And it is being peddled by people who have a desire to rile people up about the transfer portal. The transfer portal and NIL for the last half decade have been effectively utilized as boogeymen for college athletics. In every era of college athletics, fans have said, this is going to ruin college sports. One and done is going to ruin college sports. Pick any other example. There's thousands of them. This is going to ruin college sports. TV is going to ruin college sports. Conference realignment is going to ruin college sports. So-and-so is going to ruin college sports. Right now, the transfer portal and the NIL and conference realignment and other things are kind of at the forefront of that conversation. And for people who do think that player autonomy is bad, which there is a lot of people who think that student athletes getting to transfer the same way that regular students get to transfer whenever they want, as long as they're eligible. They think that's bad. Student athletes getting paid and advocating for workers' rights is bad. And look, I don't want to, I've shared my opinion. I'm not afraid to share my opinion, but I understand that people have a varying degree on how comfortable they are with this new change in college sports in general. But it's when people post this blatantly misleading or just incorrect information in order to get a rise out of that group of people that I want to set the record straight. So here's the deal with this information. It's effectively the only data point that we have here is that this group of players, this 40%, haven't confirmed to have transferred to another Division I school. And there's a lot of reasons that might be. For example, players who entered the transfer portal and then returned back to their same school, many times on these specific sites are going to still show up as being uncommitted in the portal. So it's not true. Guys who are hoping for extra eligibility. Remember how we talked about David Coit transferring to Kansas last week and Tejan Claude transferring to North Carolina? There are a lot of other players who are currently in the transfer portal who are waiting for a waiver from the NCAA. Either their waiver will get approved and they will commit somewhere, or their waiver will get denied and their college basketball eligibility will be over. Either way, they're not really they are part of that group technically, but it is misleading to imply that they're just like got left out in the streets. And I think that's what my issue with this is, that the data is kind of used as a way to say, look, these kids left scholarship situations and abandoned their coach and abandoned their teammates and joined the transfer portal to seek out more money. And now they don't have a school and they're not going to graduate. And that is what it is attempting to peddle. And that is what the feedback that you see on like Facebook comments and Twitter comments is people kind of perpetuating those thoughts and those ideas and those concepts. And the majority of the time, that's not the case at all. You have guys who are hoping for extra eligibility, guys who most of the time have already graduated or else they're not going to be eligible. You have guys who transfer to D2 or D3 or NAIA schools. They don't show up on there. So if you were a walk-on, which we'll get to that in a second, or even if you were a scholarship player, you hit the transfer portal and you end up going to a D2 school, most of these sites that track this stuff, they're only tracking D1 to D1, so they don't have that on there. So this player showing up as still being uncommitted when in reality, they're already starting to play basketball at a D2 school somewhere else. You also have walk-ons who enter the portal. And if a walk-on enters the portal and remains uncommitted, I'm not saying they shouldn't be part of this data set, but it is misleading to include them at the same time. Again, because people are using this to say, well, kids are walking away from scholarships. And it's like, a lot of them are not. A lot of them are not. You also have guys with legal issues who are sitting in the transfer portal, who are waiting for like lawsuits to get resolved or court cases to get resolved, or in many cases are just not going to be touched by any coaching staff. So it's like, okay, yeah, technically they count too, but like if the guys did something heinous and is in legal trouble, the teams aren't going to sign him. So that shouldn't really count either. At least it doesn't count in the way that people are using this data. So I'll use Gonzaga as an example of this because I talked about this on Locked On Zags, and it was very easy. Gonzaga had 3 players enter the transfer portal this offseason. One of them was Pavle Stosic. He has committed to Utah State. So D1 to D1, boom, check, easy. One of them was Luka Krajinovic, who has returned home to play in Croatia after 1 year in Spokane playing for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Luka Krajinovic shows up in most data sets right now as being an uncommitted player in the transfer portal. He's not. He's back home. He's suiting up for his home team in his home city in Croatia. That shouldn't count, but it does. He's not alone. Many players have returned to Europe this offseason and are considered uncommitted transfers because they're not tracking that data when they go back home. The third for Gonzaga is Colby Brooks, who graduated this spring and was a walk-on. He was never on scholarship. Maybe Colby Brooks ends up playing D1 basketball next year. Maybe he ends up playing D2, D3, NAIA basketball next year. Maybe he's done. And he just moves on with his life, gets a job, goes to grad school, whatever. Either way, it's kind of outside the spirit of the conversation to include him when you're kind of trying to rile people up of like, look at all these guys who are ruining their lives because they're doing this and they're entering the portal. They should just stay with their team. Like, why should Colby Brooks stay at a school that he's already graduated from when he was a walk-on the basketball team? He could have stayed. He had an extra year of eligibility. He'd have been a walk-on again for Mark Few's team, but why not go look for a scholarship to go play and start a grad program? That's what he was doing. And he might still. And this is the last point I want to make. We don't, as much as it seems like every player makes a big splashy announcement every time they make a move, they don't always. And these websites, they have to pull data from somewhere. And if we'll use Brooks as an example, and I know he was connected to Portland State at one point, so let's just roll with that. If Brooks commits to Portland State and doesn't announce it on social media and Portland State's roster is not updated on the website, we just may not know. The roster might come out in a day or a week or whatever, and it'll be on their website, and we'll see Colby Brooks, Portland State. By the way, I'm not saying this is happening. I don't want anybody to report this. I'm just using it as an example. But if it were to happen and that the roster's posted and all of a sudden he's on the roster and then it gets updated in the system, it's like we don't know when he committed. Maybe he's been there for a long time. So the main message, and we're not going to get into this outside of the very specifics on basketball, is that data is often constructed for you to be what you want to read, and it can be misleading or disingenuous or false in many cases. This isn't news to most people, and the age of misinformation is a hot topic well outside of the sport of the world of sports. But this specific instance, every time it comes up, every time it's brought up that 40% of the players, like almost half the guys who enter the portal, don't end up playing college. Like, I don't like the way that information is peddled because it is coming from a place of extreme misinformation, and it peddles inaccurate kind of assumptions about the transfer portal and in reality about these kids, that they're making bad decisions or that somebody's telling them the wrong thing to do. And again, it's not like there aren't some examples of this. There are players who entered the transfer portal who had a scholarship, who have not graduated, who at this point have not found a new place to play, have been replaced on their old team, and may jeopardize their ability to graduate on time. I don't want to pretend that that number is 0 and that they're saying it's 40%. It's not 0, but it sure as heck is not 40% either. And I think that's an important context for folks who are fans of this sport to continue to know and kind of reckon with, because the transfer portal is not going anywhere. NIL is not going anywhere. These things are still going to be here. They're probably going to be regulated at some point. They should be. I'm a strong advocate for both of them being far more regulated than they currently are. But to intentionally post information to scare people or to make them angry about these things, specifically to get them to comment and drive engagement for your posts, again, far from the only people who are doing it, but it is frustrating to me as somebody who follows the sport and wants to make sure to try to set the record as straight as I possibly can regarding what's actually happening with the amount of players entering the transfer portal from the Division I level. That is going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On College Basketball. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to the everyday listeners. Definitely join the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. We'll be back later this week. Isaac will be back for the last couple episodes. Leaf and I will be on Wednesday as well. So definitely hang with us here as we get into the end of August, the start of football season, which best part about football season starting, it means we're closer to college basketball season starting as well. Thanks again, folks. And until next time, as always, peace out.